You and I exist in time and space. We know there are things that we know and things that we don't know, things we can see and things that we can't see. But how does our position in time and space affect what we can know, what we can see, what we can do? Are there things that we cannot know on our own terms, from our own perspective? This is a little story to consider these questions, inspired by the novel Flatland by Edwin Abbott. Imagine that you and I exist in a one-dimensional universe. You and I are points, because points are all that exist in this universe. Our entire existence consists of movement up and down one dimension, one line. We can travel along the line in either direction, but we cannot escape it. We cannot see beyond it. It is our entire universe. When you look down the line at me, all you see is a point, because that is all I am. No matter how near or far away I am, you simply see a point, like this. Now imagine that another being joins the line at a place between you and I. This third being is also a point, a red point. It has to be a point because only points can live in the 1D universe. All you and I can now see is the red point. Neither of us can see beyond it. The appearance of the red point on the line has shut out our vision of each other. This is all we see. Now imagine that the one-dimensional line, the universe on which you and I live, actually exists within another universe. This second universe is a two-dimensional universe, a plane. You and I and our one-dimensional line exist within this two-dimensional universe, but we are still constrained to our one-dimensional existence. We cannot move outside the line, and we can see nothing except what is on the line. This means we have no solid concept of the two-dimensional universe. We cannot see it, and we cannot understand it. Now imagine that outside our line, in the two-dimensional universe, is a third being. This is a two-dimensional being called Bob. Bob is constrained to the two-dimensional universe, but he himself has an extra dimension to you and I on our one-dimensional line. Bob is not a simple point. Bob is a two-dimensional star. The limits of Bob's two-dimensional universe are described by the black rectangle. Unlike you and I, he is not constrained to the one-dimensional line. Within the limit of his two-dimensional universe, Bob can move and act freely. This two-dimensional freedom gives Bob some powers that you and I on our one-dimensional universe do not have. For example, from his perspective, Bob can see how far apart you and I are on our line. Being stuck on the line, you and I have no way of telling how far apart we are from one another. No matter what the distance between us, we always see each other as identically sized points. Compared to us, the vantage point of the two-dimensional universe gives Bob understanding. There are things Bob knows about us that we cannot know about ourselves. Bob's two-dimensional freedoms also let him interact with the one-dimensional line on which you and I exist. Bob has power over us because our line is entirely contained within his two-dimensional universe. Imagine now that Bob draws a green line across our one-dimensional universe. From our perspective, a green point has suddenly appeared in our universe, like this. Constrained to our line, we cannot see Bob, or the full extent of the line that he has drawn. All we can see is the single point where his green line crosses our one-dimensional universe. However long or short a line he draws, this green point is all we see. It is actually impossible for us to imagine the shape of the line that Bob has drawn. In our one-dimensional universe, all we can ever see are points. Though we ourselves live on a line, we can have no concept of what a line actually looks like. We have no vantage point to see the line on which we are fixed. Bob's shape and even Bob's existence are unknown to us. All we can see when someone or something in the two-dimensional universe crosses our one-dimensional line is a point. The point we see is only a shadow of who and what that being or object really is. But drawing shapes is not the only way that Bob can interact with our universe. Bob could actually cross the line of our one-dimensional universe to make himself known to us. But we will not see Bob as a star. As it was with the green line, all we would see is a shadow of Bob, a blue point. We could never know that Bob is in fact a star. If we believed on the basis of what we could see that Bob was a blue point and nothing more, we would be wrong. Bob's identity cannot be constrained to the limited perspective we have of him. The blue point communicates something true about him, his blueness, but it is not the whole truth. How could we, who only ever see and know points, begin to understand Bob's two-dimensional starness? What we do know of Bob is not false knowledge. We see that Bob exists, we see that Bob is blue. Neither of these are false observations. But we would be in error if we thought that Bob can only be a point, simply because we ourselves are points. Bob's full identity remains outside our one-dimensional understanding. Now let us imagine that Bob is joined by two friends, Amelie and Tim. Like Bob, Amelie and Tim each have a two-dimensional shape and exist in the two-dimensional universe. Bob and his friends are all constrained to the universe of the two-dimensional plane. This means that all any of them can see in any direction is a one-dimensional line. This is similar to how you and I, stuck on our one-dimensional line universe, can only ever see an individual point. Having one more dimension available to them than you and I do, Bob, Amelie and Tim see a single one-dimensional line. As they look out, they see the black line that marks the edge of their two-dimensional universe. They can see each other, but only as coloured, one-dimensional segments on that line. So this is what Bob sees when he looks at Amelie and Tim. Bob has no way to see what is inside the two-dimensional shapes of Tim and Amelie. He only sees how wide they are, as defined by the length of the coloured segment. If Bob thought that on this basis he knew everything about Tim and Amelie, he would be wrong. He has no way of knowing that Amelie is a two-dimensional sun, that Tim is a two-dimensional hexagon. Nor can he see that Tim is broken inside. Now, just as Bob was able to modify the one-dimensional universe of our line, he can make other changes by drawing in his two-dimensional universe. Imagine now that Bob draws a red line around Amelie. Now Amelie can no longer see Bob or Tim. The only thing that Amelie can see in every direction is a one-dimensional red line. Bob and Tim are still there, of course, but Amelie cannot see them, and they cannot see her. Of course, the narrator and reader of the story can see things that you, I, Bob, Tim, and Amelie cannot see about themselves or each other. They can also see things that none of us can see about the one-dimensional and two-dimensional universes in which we live. That, of course, is because the narrator and reader exist in three-dimensional space. The narrator is able to view both the two-dimensional universe and the one-dimensional universe within it. He sees both of them from an external viewpoint. The third dimension of the reality in which they live allows the narrator and the reader to stand back and see the whole. So just as you and I on the one-dimensional line could not see Bob, Amelie and Tim, none of us in either the one-dimensional or two-dimensional universes can see the three-dimensional narrator. He exists outside the one-dimensional and two-dimensional universes and is able to see them without their citizens being able to see him. The narrator sees everything clearly. He sees all our shapes. He sees all of us and how we are related to one another. He sees all of us even though we can't all see each other. He sees Tim's brokenness. He sees that Amelie is trapped, and he sees what is trapping her. He sees the one-dimensional line of our universe, and he sees you and I separated by a green line. But he sees more even than these things. He can understand why you and I in our one-dimensional universe can't see or comprehend the two-dimensional universe. And he can understand why the citizens of the two-dimensional universe can't see or comprehend his three-dimensional universe. Everything is open to the narrator's gaze. But this doesn't mean that the narrator is unable to enter or change the two-dimensional universe or the one-dimensional universe within it. Here the narrator has placed an image of himself into the two-dimensional universe to introduce himself to Bob, Tim and Amelie. Of course, the image is not his full likeness. It is only a two-dimensional image, whereas the narrator is a three-dimensional being. And only a three-dimensional being standing outside the two-dimensional universe could possibly see what the narrator truly looks like. The citizens of the two-dimensional universe can now see something of the narrator, but it is only a shadow of his true being. They see a one-dimensional line with coloured segments. They see the brown of the narrator's hair and the pink of his skin. Now, of course, if Bob, Tim and Amelie believed on the basis of what they could see that the narrator was nothing more than a brown line segment connected to a pink line segment, they would be wrong. The narrator's identity is not constrained to the limited perspective they have of him. The brown and pink segments communicate something true about him, but it is not the whole truth. How could Bob, Tim and Amelie, who only ever see and know one-dimensional lines, begin to understand the narrator's three-dimensional form? The narrator's full identity and the reality he inhabits remain outside their understanding. The narrator can make himself known, but only as a shadow of his true identity. He is unseen until he wants to be seen. He has power to change both the two-dimensional universe and the one-dimensional universe within it. He can surround their universes, stretch them, shrink them, fold them, add and remove beings and objects from them. He can draw and he can erase. He is omnipotent and omniscient over all. Yet he can come to meet them, placing himself in their realities, condescending to their limited perspectives. He can reveal a shadow of himself. We are apt to dismiss things we cannot easily understand. We discount things that cannot easily be fitted into our conceptual frameworks. But what things might we have discounted as unlikely or absurd, just because they were beyond our full seeing or understanding?